Hey, what's up you guys? This is Zach here. Welcome back to the channel. And I am here for sort of an album review. It's kind of like an era review. But today I just wanted to do this review, and so today I'm going to be reviewing Metallica Load and Metallica Reload. Now, I'm going to be reviewing both these records in one video because, well, of course they're connected, Load and Reload. Load came out in 1996, while Reload came out in 1997. So, you know, they're just a year apart from each other. Now, I do want to start off with Load, of course. Now, the Black Album, you know, the self-titled Metallica album, the Black Album, was the last album that the band has ever put out before these two releases came out. And, you know, there were a lot of fans that say that Metallica really sold out after the Black Album. And, you know, since Load and Reload came out, I mean, this is where a lot of people, you know, started to say, yeah, now they're really starting to sell out. And these two albums, I think, split the fan base a little bit. Now, you know, I can imagine that a lot of people were kind of losing faith in this band and kind of were giving up hope on them. Like, yeah, this band's done. They're never going to make, you know, a great album like Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets ever again. You know, this is definitely the era where they steered away from thrash metal. They started taking a little bit of blues rock and country influence in these two releases. There's a lot of country influence in both of these albums, more so in Load than Reload, but that it's evident in both albums. And believe it or not, I actually think Load is one of Metallica's most underrated albums. It has a lot of great songs on it, of course, such as 2x4 and The House That Jack Built. These are two excellent songs. And King Nothing, I think, is also a really good track. Bleeding Me is fantastic. And The Outlaw Torn is also one that I enjoy from this record. And Mama Said, this is not one of my favorites on the album, but it is a decent track. And this is one of the songs that, you know, have a lot of country influence going for it. And yeah, Load is actually a pretty good album, and it's pretty underrated if you ask me, and one of their most underrated albums. Sure, it's not thrash metal, but you know what? I don't think this is an album that you have to go into expecting, you know, the thrash albums that Metallica has put out, you know, in the 1980s and the early 90s, but you kind of got to go into this album with a different mindset, of course. And, you know, I think after you do that, you start to realize that it's really solid music. Sure, there's a couple of, you know, meh tracks that you tend to skip sometimes, but if you really look at the album overall, it's actually a really good album. And of course, it's still not one of their best. It's still not as good as their, you know, 80s era of Metallica, but still a good album. I think, for the most part, the entire band sounds really good in that album. And, if you're someone who's kind of turned off by this era of Metallica, I actually encourage you to go back and listen to Load, because it's actually pretty underrated. Alright, so next up we got Reload, which to me is not as good as Load. I know it's a more popular opinion to prefer Load over Reload, and heck, I even know that there's some people that prefer Reload over Load, but you know, who cares, right? And of course, Reload does have some songs that I do like Fuel. And of course, there's an Unforgiven track on this album, which is the Unforgiven 2, which, of course, the first Unforgiven was on the Black Album, Unforgiven 2 on Reload, and then Unforgiven 3 would be on Death Magnetic. But the Unforgiven 2, how do I feel about this track? It's actually pretty good. It's not my favorite Unforgiven. I still think the first Unforgiven is probably the best out of all three of them, but Unforgiven 2 is still pretty good. This is a track that has a little bit of country in it, especially in James Hetfield's vocals. And I think Where the Wild Things Are is a very underrated Metallica song. Definitely one of their most underrated tracks to date, I think, and maybe my favorite song on the album. And Low Man's Lyric, this is not one of my favorite songs on this album, but I did want to point this one out because this one does have a country vibe to it, and I still think it's pretty decent for what it is. So yeah, Reload overall, how do I feel about it? It's definitely nowhere near one of their best albums, and like I said, I do prefer Load over Reload, but you know, Reload still has a few songs that I enjoy. You know, there's not really much to say about it, other than, yeah, it's definitely within their weaker albums. Like, that's really all I gotta say. So how do I feel about Load and Reload by Metallica overall? I think it's an interesting era for Metallica. I think the album Load is definitely, you know, their strongest point out of the two. But both albums have some gems on them and some enjoyable stuff. And, you know, like I said, obviously these albums aren't as good as the albums from the 80s. But these albums are still pretty good for what they are. So, if I were to give them a rating together, I'd probably give them a 7.5 out of 10 together. But if I were to review them each individually, I'd probably give Load an 8 out of 10 and Reload maybe a 5 or a 6 out of 10. So that's about it for this review. Let me know what you guys think of the Load and Reload era of Metallica. Are you guys a fan of this era of Metallica? I'd like to hear your thoughts. So thank you for watching, have a good one, and take care.